Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be looking at how to fly this beautiful Junkers 52 from 1939. Now this is the version that they give you. I kind of think of this as like the base classic model, and of course they also have the more modernized model, which is probably a little bit easier to handle, but it's got some other kind of little quirks to it. Now one thing I will say before I get rolling on this video is because I don't have any really good documentation, at least not in English, I'm going to be kind of shooting from the hip from a couple of these things as far as what I was able to discover from poking around in the internet as well as my own experimentation. So with that being said, let's go pop in and get this thing started. Now, when I first popped in this thing for the first time, I was like, oh, cool. Oh, okay, we've got some meters and things like that, like I was talking about in my first one. But then as I started to explore the aircraft, I started to realize that there's this thing was designed for a crew of 3, and a lot of it is, yikes. I actually had to resort to the in-game checklist in order to kind of figure things out and kind of get going to it. Now, to help me out a little bit today, what I did is I actually put together a little checklist of my own just to keep myself sane here so that all the different components and stuff like that would make sense to me as I'm ripping through that. I'll provide you folks with a link to this down in the comments below if it's something that you want to use or could benefit from or can improve or anything like that. So anyway, let's go ahead and get this thing doing it. So first things first, one of the cool things about this plane is the fact that everything is mechanical. Like, you know, there's no fancy hydraulic systems anywhere. Everything is a giant cable. Like if you want to do rudder trim, there's this big handle and you pull it and it tightens that rudder properly. It's just, oh man. The other thing that I noticed about this plane is that buttons aren't where you expect them to be. That kind of shocked me. As a matter of fact, if I look here, your landing light lever is between your legs, which is weird. But your light switches are behind the head of the co-pilot right here. Sitting on the floor, you have a wheel, and you're like, oh, cool, it's for flaps and pitch. It's also for your trim. So it's one of those things. And then popping over on this side, you've got some really interesting cooling handles and everything along this line. You have a very unique method of handling a primer. Basically, you're going to turn on one system, fill it up with fuel, and then you shut it off, and then you basically get it running, and then you kill the primer. It's like it's interesting. You have another system in the middle where you have an oil and fuel lever, and it took me forever to realize when this thing said Vaughn hand pump. I'm like, oh, of course. That explains why there's a hand pump down here on the ground. And then I took a look at a couple forum posts, and they did a nice job as far as explaining this is what you need to do to get that to work. I'm like, oh. But anyway, let's get going. So first things first on my little list here, let's go ahead and call that list up so you folks can see, is we're going to be concentrating on kind of doing all the pre-flight stuff. And again, I'll go ahead and hide that real quickly so you don't have to go staring at that the whole time. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to come over here. I've got my handy dandy. This is my trim indicator. This is a big stabilizer trim, stabilizer trim rather. So I'm going to go ahead and hold the trim up button until I'm just shy of the 0.2 about right there. You could skip this step if you want, but it makes takeoff a little bit sketchy. This thing over here, by the way, is going to be your flap controls. I'm not going to worry about that too much. Next thing what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make sure our flaps are set correctly. I'm just going to look down here. There's a little line. This is Reisflug, which again, I'm not 100% sure. Flug usually means something to do with flying. I'm not going to get what Reis is in this particular case. Again, my German is terrible. I'm just doing the best I can with what I have. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set the parking brake, which is this big handle here. We're just going to go ahead and pull that sucker out real fast. And then we're going to set the cowl flaps. Now, I'm going to say this real quick. I've been messing with the cowl flaps a lot with this airplane. I've never run into a scenario where I actually need to touch the cowl flaps. So this is more from something I was reading. But the 2 different sets of cowl flaps on this one, the ones on the left are your oil coolers. The ones on the right are your motor coolers, which is kind of handy if you take a look at this. Do you think this means cooler? I don't know, I'm just thinking. But anyway, the way this works is pretty straightforward. If you hold your mouse over this and give this a couple wheels, you can go ahead and stick it to the middle position. I've never had an issue with overheating in this aircraft in all the weird conditions that I've flown it in, but this is just kind of one of those things that, I don't know, peace of mind, I guess is what I'm going to call it. Now, if on your keyboard or your mouse you have the ability to just go click and set these all correctly in one blast, man, is it going to make your life a little bit simpler. And while we're over here, we're just going to make sure the pressure reducing valve is set to ALF, and we're going to make sure the 2 compressed air bottles are going to be shut off. This stuff over here, which took forever to figure out what it actually does. We'll come back to that in a little bit. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set the throttle to idle. You can actually take the throttle and you can kind of kick it up just a tiny bit. You don't have to be completely idle here. We're going to make sure the autopilot is set to ALS, which simply is basically going to say you have off, on. We're going to make sure this thing is clicked on, off. The autopilot's actually 2 parts, and the autopilot I've played with a lot, and I can't quite get it to way to work exactly how I want it to work, but basically you dial in the heading you want here, and then you flip this on, off it goes. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and get this thing before starting. I'll go pop up my little checklist again real quick so you can take a peek. Boop. So you can see our next step here, we're going to go ahead and get sure our fuel stuff's all set. So we're going to go get our fuel quantities. I'm going to come down here. What I like to do is I like to cycle this just for my own sanity real quick. I'm also going to check my weight here. Notice I'm carrying a pretty heavy load. That's going to make your life a little bit simpler, believe it or not. Trust me with this plane. Now we need to check fuel quantity. I love doing this. All right, open up the side window here. Looks like I'm carrying... Oh, I wish I could zoom in a little bit more here. Yeah, you tell me what that number is. But that's how you check your fuel. Another thing we can check too while we're looking out the window, by the way, is your oil. This little bar here is an oil meter, and it basically tells you how much oil you're carrying on board. So you can see exactly how much we have as this thing changes height. So this little thing where it goes here, goes boo, as we start burning our oil. Kind of neat, actually. We're going to make sure our throttle gas, which is this little lever right here, is off. Now, this one required a little research on my part too. And again, it's one of those things where I wasn't 100% sure. I'm still not 100% sure. But it basically says don't turn this on until you get to 800 meters. I'm guessing this is something to do with some kind of additional boost or something along those lines. But like I said, I'm not 100% sure. I could not find it out. All I know is it basically says don't touch until we get to 800 meters. I personally never touched the thing. It's never caused me any issues. All right, let's get this thing going. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop open this cover and click on the battery switch. You want to do that one pretty right away. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go poke over here to the co-pilot seat. There's this great little set of light switches. We want this one right here. I like this. It's a Blitzlicht. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that button. You're going to see a little bit of a voltage drop right there as well. So we're going to get the starter master, which is a big honk on red switch. We go click, and we stick it down. If this is not engaged, you're not going to get any starter powers. We're going to set the primer to the on position. That's this guy over here. It's this nebulizer. Just go click and snap it to the zoo position. Now we're going to take our injection and shutoff valve, which is this one, and we're going to put it into the ALF position. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get the wobble pump, which is this guy right here. Now I've seen one of these in many old airplanes. It's one of those things that they're kind of fun to play with. But basically, you're just going to unlock it. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my switches here. Now, the way this basically works, and again, ignorant American here, is we have the oil on the right-hand side, the middle row, and then we have the fuel on this side. So basically, its current position is fuel is shut off, zoo, and oil is shut off. So if I click this down by 1, we're basically turning the oil on. If I click it down 2, it's going to go ahead and say you're going to have oil turned on, and you're going to be getting fuel pressure from the hand pump. So I'm just going to quickly here and snap these all into the correct position. Now you're probably saying, well, wait a minute, what about the hand pump? Oh yeah, I remember, I just unlocked that thing. So we're basically doing, and again, this is all based on, probably got half of this wrong, but it works for me, so too bad, is I discovered that you could basically use this to pump up a miniature fuel tank that you can use to start the engine. Remember that big engine on the front doesn't have its own fuel tank. We have to get fuel out of the wings into it in order to get it going. So basically this acts as kind of a pre-pressurizer. So I usually say give this thing a 5 or 6 whacks, and that should give us plenty of fuel as well as fuel pressure. People who know the Anatov 2 also are familiar with this particular technique as well. So we're going to take the magneto caps and we're going to lift them up. Now this is a mistake I've made 100 times when I try to start this thing. We're going to lift each one of those up. We're also going to take the primer, and now this is going to seem interesting. We're going to set it to the ALF position. We're going to shut that thing back off. So now what we're going to do is we're going to float over here and set our magnetos. So the way I like to do this is I hold my mouse over it and I just kind of roll the mouse wheel. That seems to be the quickest and easiest way to set it in the middle position. By the way, don't accidentally these caps, because if you do, the engines will not start. I hate to say it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the mixture. We're going to set it to the rich position, which I've already done here. You can see, we'll go push it all the way down here. Looks pretty good. The mixture I haven't had to fits with too much because you don't have to go too high. And now we're ready to start. That's it. So as always in the real world, we usually open up the window, we yell the word clear. As a matter of fact, I just find this kind of interesting thing, make sure the machine is free, which I think is kind of a neat little thing there. We've got fuel pressure, we've got electricity, everything is ready to rock. So I'm just going to grab this, take a look at my RPM. Like I said, I like to crack it, and we just pull it. And moments later, it goes, and there you're all set. Close it up. Go grab the middle one, give it a tug. All set. Grab the next one, give it a tug. And that's it. Not bad. Not bad at all. Cool. So we're going to go ahead and play with this for a second. Now we're burning out of our hand pump tank. So what we need to do is we basically need to go to main tank. So we just go click, 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 just like that. And now the engines are drawing directly from the main tank. Now, if you're having some issues with it, we can always come down here too, and there's a little fuel pump that you can actually pop on. So you can basically help out pump up that tank should you need. Idling RPM on this thing is anywhere between basically 800 and 1,000. Again, this thing doesn't go up to like stupidly high RPMs. So I'm just going to reduce it just a tiny bit to get it to about 900. But now, just like that, you have a running engine. Now, this freaked me out the first time, but remember this little injection cutoff thing? You can put that back to the zoo position, and nothing bad will happen to any of your engines. But now you've disabled all that extra functionality over there. Whew, okay, we are now started. And now this thing is going rumbly, 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 which is amazing. I just love these old engines. It's just, it's just so much cooler. And if you notice, actually, after starting the engine, look at how much oil we actually just sucked out. I just love that. So anyway, we're good to go, and we can basically sit here and get this thing nice and warmed up for a while. Basically, if you want to look at all your engine instruments here, you've got a combination of your oil temperature as well as your kind of your cylinder head temperature, if you want to kind of think about it another way. This is actually going to be our water temperature, and again, it's going to be in Celsius. Generally, we don't want to be doing anything too silly with this thing until it warms up. If we were being a little bit faster about things, and this wasn't Microsoft Flight Simulator, we'd go ahead and close all the cowl flaps and basically cook everything until it got up to enough temperature where we could safely utilize it. Thankfully for us, we don't have to worry about that. We can just kind of go, which is sort of our intention. So anyway, let's get rolling. So one thing we want to take a look at now is that we're just going to go ahead and go through our last couple pieces here. We have our clearance, we have our speed, we have elevator, ailerons. We're going to put our taxi light on before we start rolling here. Reach down here. We're just going to click and snap it to that particular position, and you're good to go. We're going to go ahead now. We don't need strobe lights, so we'll get that when we get a little bit closer. So let's go ahead and take a look at our takeoff situation here. We are just in a very southern Germany here. We're basically going to be heading up to the north. Let's go ahead and take a look at our little magnetocompass. So looks like we're basically facing south. So each one of these runways is fine. There's actually no wind today, so we don't have to worry about that too much. I'm feeling pretty good. All right, let's get going. So taxi on this thing is kind of fun because as soon as you release the parking brake, the thing starts rolling. It doesn't matter. But since we are on grass, we want to use a good taxiing procedures. So what I'm actually going to be doing here is I'm going to make sure that as I'm doing this, I'm going to pull my controls back. If you do have a wind coming from any direction, you want to go ahead and tip that big old aileron into the wind. And just like I said, you want to just kind of hold that nose up just a tiny bit. This aircraft loves to fly. So if you just kind of let it go now, it is just going to go ripping down this little runway. And again, I picked this nice grass one in basically Austria, Southern Germany here, just so we could kind of check out stuff like this. This thing is so brumbly, I love it. It's kind of bouncing along. So we're going to need some ground handling assistance when we get to the end here, but that's perfectly fine. One thing I recommend is if you have a button on your joystick that lets you kind of sit in a higher position, you could do that. The other thing you could do too is if you press the space bar on your keyboard, you can kind of snap your head up a little bit higher so you can see a little bit better to what you're doing. Now I'm going rumbly all the way down the end of this runway here, which is funny because I'm going to need about a third of it. So anyway, and like I said, we'll get my ground handling crew to sort of help me out when we get towards the end of all this. All right, looks pretty good. I don't think I can make that turn. I'm going to try. Go ahead and give it a couple squeezes of the brake. Right, left foot. Oh, actually, this is really good. This thing really pivots nice. I love it. Oh, I don't like to hit the gas that hard when I'm on grass. Well, a little bit of left foot here. We're just going to line ourselves up with this lovely little runway. Squeeze that brake, and it should just come snapping right over for you. Yeah, man. Now, keep in mind, our engine is not remotely as warmed up as it needs to be for the purposes of this operation. All right, go ahead and hold the brakes. Parking brake set. Go back up to our kind of default RPM here. Just kind of get everything running. Okay, so let's get ready for takeoff here. So let's go ahead and cop up our tiny little list here. Boop. So let's see here. A taxi, we did all that. Our landing lights need to be turned on. So I'm going to come between my legs again here. I'm going to go click and snap that to the landing light position. Next thing what we want to do is we want to just confirm that everything on this side of things is all set. Our takeoffs, we're supposed to be using 2 notches of flaps. To set flaps on this thing, there's this little clutch that you basically grab onto, and you snap the clutch out so that you can set flaps in the real world. So let me go ahead and bring my head down here so you can take a good look at this. See the clutch? We pop the clutch, and now when I set my flaps, click, click, you adjusted your flaps. Now when you snap the clutch back in, now you're using the elevator trim. I just find that kind of interesting. Don't worry, you don't have to do that every time, but I'm just going to convert, like I said, that I'm doing 25 degrees of flaps, and then everything's rumbly ready for going here. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that little view that just completely hid the button I just was clicking. Sorry about that. And we're all set. Landing lights are good. We're going to go do a quick little run-up. This is a relatively straightforward procedure. What we're basically going to do is rev this thing up to about 1,600 RPM and check everything out real fast, so we'll do that real quick. 16, 14, 16, again, that's 1600, that's not 16 RPM. It'd be a very big ship's propeller if it was 16 RPM. So now what we do is we float over here, and all we have to do is play with our magnetos like we always do. You can see I lost a little bit of RPM there, I lost a little of RPM there, I didn't lose too much between the two. Come over to this one. Looks pretty good. Float down to this one. Again, this is one of the... Careful not to click the wrong thing here. Again, I always recommend doing custom camera views for these sort of things. Lost about 75, not even 40. All right, we're good to go. One thing we can check also while we're down here is we have a couple switches. If you want to see things nice and complicated, you have a little switch right here. This thing is pitot heat. This one over here is carburetor heat. So one of the things you can actually test is if you look up your RPMs right here, if you click this over to the carburetor heat position, you'll actually lose a couple RPMs. If you click it back to the pitot heat position, nothing will happen. That will be bad. All right, so we are now ready to rock. This thing is pretty much good. We're checked out. Our elevator is set. Our pitot heat is on. Our mixture is rich. We're just ready to go. So for takeoff for this thing, it's pretty straightforward. We're basically going to give it full RPM, or we're going to give it a 1500 RPM, see that the engines are all linked up and working together, then we'll push the throttle the rest of the way, and then we'll start making our way up north. So I'm going to go ahead and release the parking brake, hold the regular brake. We're going to go to half throttle. This thing should start revving up. You're looking for about 1500 RPM at half throttle. Confirmed. We're going to release the parking brake. We're going to go ahead and push the throttle all the way forward. Now, this aircraft doesn't need any room at all to get airborne. You actually want to hold the elevator, as you can see, just slightly tail low. You don't have to push the nose forward. In the little guide, it's like, oh, go ahead and push your foot forward. If you do that, you're going to end up having to use a lot of foot action in order to get this thing airborne. But as you can see, we are on our way. So this aircraft takes very, very, very little action to actually get us going up here in the air. One thing you do want to watch out for, though, is when you're at flaps 25, any flaps retraction with any sort of speed here, lack of speed, I should say, will result in instant going down, to say the least. No retractable landing gear, so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to bring the nose down just a tiny bit. Get us up to 120 kilometers an hour. We're going to go ahead and pop that first notch of flaps in. You do not have to actually hit the clutch button. That's more of a visual thing. Second notch of flaps comes in. The aircraft is nice and rumbly-brumbly. And we're going to make our way over this mountain range over to my left. Now, during climb, there's a couple different limitations that I was able to locate. Again, I don't know how many of these are actually relatively effectively implemented or anything along those lines. But basically, 2050 RPM is our upper limit, not 2,500 RPM. And we're supposed to not maintain that for more than 5 minutes at a time. And apparently, you can go down to about 1950 RPM, which is kind of what we're sitting at now. And you have something like 25 to 30 minutes at that RPM. So if you are going to do a very, very extended climb out, you want to kind of keep that in the back of your mind here. Speaking of extended climb out, let's go ahead and take a look at my little GTN 750. It's one of the things I really, really enjoy is the fact that I can come in here. Now, you're probably sitting here going, wait a minute, how come your GTN 750 isn't working? That's because the avionics switch in this aircraft is actually hidden. So what you can do is, let me go show you how to do this on your own real fast, is if you come up to your keyboard and you type in avionics, let me go reach over. See how there's this button that says page up? So now if you click that, that will go ahead and activate your avionics master. So I'm going to press OK here, go back, resume. I'm going to press page up. So now what you've done is you've turned on the hidden avionics switch that we don't have. One of these days I will find that avionics switch and we'll engage it. But at least now I've got myself my GPS. Ha-ha! Apparently there's an update to my GPS also, which is perfectly fine. So I'm going to go ahead and level this out, but this is super duper cool because I can come in here and do things like, change my CDI and everything like that. So now that we're getting going, I'm noticing my RPM starting to creep up a little higher than it should be. I'm going to go ahead and pull that throttle back. There is no pitch control in this aircraft, so you do not need to worry about that aspect of it. Just make sure you brought everything up. Now that we're nice and cruisy here, I'm just going to come down here, click off my landing lights. And I'm just going to really, really enjoy this short flight. Like I said, it's only about a 6 nautical mile flight, although apparently I'm going in the wrong direction here, which is pretty typical of me. No, I'm going the right direction. And we're just going to sneak over here into southern Germany. I got something kind of cool to show you folks. So anyway, so now that we've gotten everything all kind of set up, it's time to go ahead and get us into a cruise. This aircraft levels off so nicely. Like, of all the aircraft that I've flown for quite a bit inside of Flight Sim, this is probably the easiest one I've ever flown to trim. Like, you basically get it at the altitude you want, set your power the way you want it. I'll go down to about 1900 RPM. It's a pretty good power setting here. And the plane just lives at whatever altitude that you set it to. It doesn't even need automatic pilot. Speaking of automatic pilot, we'll take a look at that in just a moment. Line myself up just a little bit more so I can kind of point my nose this way. Got something kind of famous here in southern Germany, which you're all going to see in just a minute. Assuming I can look out the window fast enough. Aha, there it is! We'll go ahead and pull RPM down so y'all can take a look. I'm sure we actually built a puzzle of this a couple years ago, and it reminds me a lot of something I saw in Spaceballs once. I just thought it was kind of cool. I'm not going to dare to try to pronounce this castle, but it is one of those kind of famous landmarks that when people think about Germany, that's one of the typical ones I always see. Got to get my dramatic picture here. That's excellent. By the way, apparently that castle is relatively on the empty side from what I've heard, and it's kind of neat as well. Okay, so now that it's done, let's go ahead and take a look at the automatic pilot. So the way autopilot works is it's relatively straightforward. So what you're going to do is you're going to select the distance, the particular direction you want to travel in. Let's say, for example, I wanted to travel due north. After you do that, you're going to come down between your legs, and there's this little switch that says Autopilot. So what we're going to do is we're going to come swing the sucker around a little bit. Again, I feel like this airplane basically doesn't need an autopilot for the purposes of altitude, but it certainly would not hurt to have one for heading. So I'm going to go play with this just a tiny bit and go ahead and get myself my altitude I want. And we're going to get it relatively close to north, which I did a pretty nice job of. Okay, so the basic procedure, at least from what I've determined, is you're going to click the switch on. Then you're going to press this button to switch it onto heading hold mode. Now, when you combine those two, basically whatever you set as the heading bug here is what it's going to attempt to hold. Now, the part you don't see is the method it attempts to hold it is by using your rudder as opposed to your ailerons. So if you watch really, really carefully, the aircraft will take the world's gentlest little left turn. If you actually look, you can see how the rudder's deflecting a little bit, and it'll start to pull itself over in that direction. Now, if you want to kind of give it a little hand, of course, you can come over here and pull the left rudder ratio button, and that's going to pull us out right off the side of things, or you can kind of push it along. In my practice and kind of experimenting with this a little bit, I found that the particular system is okay. Like, keyword is okay there. I really could not get it to work well. Not like when you're using like the automatic pilot, like on a Cessna or anything like that. It's always slightly either drifting or it starts kind of wandering. It just does not feel like it's a very solid autopilot, at least not to me. And again, you can experiment with it yourself. If you have to shut it off in a hurry, this is a big switch, and you just pull that and it goes ahead and snaps it back out into normal mode. But again, this thing is so timid to fly. I've never really had an issue with it. All right, let's get to landing, shall we? So I'll go ahead and call up my handy dandy piece here. I'll zoom out a little tiny bit. I can see we've got a bunch of different places that we can land. We have EDGD, but for today, we're actually going to fly back from which we came. That'll make it pretty easy for us. We could pick that EDGD. Of course, if we pick that one, it's going to be this little teeny tiny grass runway for us. That's going to make it a little bit difficult. So I'm just going to kind of come swing around. Oh, apparently I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So the bummer thing is in the real one, you could touch this with your finger and actually press direct to, which is kind of a bummer. But anyway, let's do it. Select waypoint, LOIR, enter, enter. Activate. Or don't activate, jerk. There we go. Nice. So we just got to come swing around that way, and we'll go put this thing on the ground. Now, landing this aircraft is not too difficult. I find that of the three-point landers, or of the tailwheel aircraft that I've operated, this one's probably the most benign, even in a crosswind, even though it's pretty light. The one thing that's to its advantage is its incredible amount of weight, and it just has really, really big wings. The downside to it, and this is something that kind of bums me about just a tiny bit, is when you do go to land it, is it does not want to slow down ever. And that makes it a little bit difficult to land in the sense of if you don't get your speeds right initially, you're never going to be able to put that darn thing on the ground. It's just basically going to run out of energy on you and do a clunk, which is most likely what's going to happen to me when I attempt to do it. Now, one thing I just want to point out real quick. I don't know if that's intentional. It could just be the angle that I'm flying the aircraft at. But my oil is not looking so hot there. Let's go ahead and take a look at this wing real quick. They're all about the same. I don't know how I'm doing on combustibles. Oh yeah, you have fun reading that from there. That ain't gonna happen. All right, so landing. Let's go and take a look at our checklist as well. We kind of make our way back to from which we came here. Pull this sucker over. So a couple different things you want to watch out for here is you want to make sure that you are using, you're leaning. Oh, we forgot about a throttle gas, but like I said, I barely ever messed with that. Approach, we're going to look at flaps 10 initially, about 150 kph, landing lights. Final, you want to get to about 110. 110 is kind of a decent speed. Now, if you want to do a 3-point touchdown on this aircraft, your final speed over the ground to touch the ground smoothly is going to be about 70 kilometers an hour. If you want to do a 2-point landing, I recommend hitting the ground at about 100 kilometers per hour. It really totally depends on what you're trying to achieve there as far as that landing goes. For us, I generally like a 2-point landing with this aircraft, but usually I mess up the 2-point landing and it ends up being a 3-point landing, so I'll kind of take what I can get kind of a thing. Anyway, so we're going to go bring ourselves kind of down. We can already see our destination, which is right off the nose here. Go ahead and pull the throttle back. Of course, normally what you'd be doing is you'd be fixing with our cowl flaps as well as our lubricant cooler to try to keep everything in the acceptable range. If I tip my head down, I'm actually in the acceptable range for every single thing right now. So even these are less than 200 degrees on the Celsius scale. So I've got that all perfectly set, which is why, like I said, just kind of set it to the half position and forget about it. You don't have to stress out about it. Oh man, I'd love to do some skiing. I don't know if that's skiing though. Just trying to study. What do we have at the base? Oh, by the way, we get to take another look at the castle right there. Like I was saying earlier, we actually tried to build a puzzle of that, and when we got to the sky was like one of these skies. So I don't know about you who builds puzzles, but when it's all the same color and it's like 2,000 pieces, that gets a little on the tedious side. I don't know. It just bothers me. All right, well, I'll kind of 1-2 skip. Yeah, actually, what am I saying? We're right off the nose. We'll be able to get there, no problem. All right, so when we go to land this thing, like I said, the procedure is all about speed. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to back the throttle out nice and early. Generally, you don't want to pull the throttle back all the way, but this thing just keeps going once you have some airspeed. And we're just going to start bleeding some speed. Notice the aircraft does not slow down. Hit the back button so it zooms back in on us. Go ahead and flip on our landing light. Click, click. Delightful. And we're just going to start slowing down a little bit. Now look out our wing here. Here's our landing strip right here. For this particular aircraft, like I said, it is very difficult to get this thing to slow down. Once you cut the throttles, there's like no sense of like, drama or anything like that. It just kind of just goes. And of course, when you dump the flaps all the way down, you expect this thing to be able to slow you down to nothing. But the reality is it does not. So it's just one of those things where it's kind of annoying, but you'll deal. All right, so there's our runway right off the right. I'm actually going to pull the nose off. And one fun thing that you can do with this aircraft, which I get such a kick out of, is you can actually slip the plane. So if you kick the rudder all the way to one side, you can actually fly the plane sideways and slow yourself down dramatically, should you need to go ahead and do that. In that case, I was so effective at slipping the plane, I actually slipped the plane down to basically 0 here. But one of the things I'll actually do on approach is I'll slip the plane intentionally so I can see the end of the runway a little bit better. Again, our runway is right there, so we don't want to get going too fast here. And it looks like some really good skiing down that way as well. All right, looks pretty good, about 150 kilometers an hour. We're going to go ahead and put down our first click of flaps there. Remember, normally you'd have to pop the clutch out. You'd have to set out the correct position. But fortunately, if any of your shortcut keys are programmed, you can pretty much get that right away. Pull that nose up. We're going to get under 150. I'm going to go ahead and put down my next notch of flaps. And I'm going to go start coming down on my approach. Put down that last notch of flaps. I'm going to get those flaps in very early. Those flaps are critical to get this plane to slow down to nothing. As usual, remember to land into the wind, but today's flight, we don't have to worry about any of that. All right, so my approach speed on this aircraft is pretty typically about 130, 120 kilometers per hour for the initial approach. When you cross the fence, remember, if you're doing about 100, you're probably going to get a 2-point landing. If you do 70 right over the ground, you're probably going to end up with a 3-point landing. Generally, like I said, when I do this one, I try to go for the 2-pointer, but if I can't get it, I accept it. So I'm actually going to slip the plane here. And I'm just pushing my foot all the way forward. Remember, my throttle has been idle this entire time. All right, nose up just a little bit. We're going to push that nose down just a tiny bit. All right, we're doing about 120 kilometers an hour. We're making our passengers panic just a little bit. Like I said, we need to do a little of this just to slow this plane down because the flaps do not slow you down. All right, there we go. So I'm doing about 120 kph, which is a really good approach speed. I could literally glide this thing all the way down to the ground if I needed. It's about 100. Like I said, if we land at 100 kilometers an hour, remember, you're a lot taller off the ground than you think you are because you're still a tail dragger. It's about 110 is about the minimum speed I want to approach in this aircraft. There's 100. Give it a couple RPMs. 108. That's pretty good. I don't mind that at all. We're going to get right over this nice fancy hotel resort thing. That could be somebody's house too. I don't know. And we're going to go for the 3-pointer, I think. Right over the tip top. By the way, fly this aircraft at low weights. It's much more user-friendly. Or heavy weights, I'm sorry. Over the grass. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and hold up. We're doing up. Looks like we're ending up at the 2-pointer. So we're just going to go ahead and put the 2 wheels on the ground. Give yourself a blast of forward trim. And there it is. Give yourself just a little bit of breakage. And you're just going to do this strange looking wheelie about 6 feet off the ground. So notice I'm doing this. I love the 2-pointers. And we're down. Nice. All right, hopefully that video was interesting as far as this goes. This is a super cool plane, and for those of you who have not tried this in VR, you're really missing out because there's literally a lot to it. I didn't talk anything about setting the mixture or the throttle gas here. Again, that's something I need to do a little bit more research on, but I did notice when you get up to altitude, playing with the mixture is really a really good way to kind of manipulate things. Other than that, enjoy.